My dear audience, how is everybody doing today? I think this is my fourth take on this particular game. It's taken me 4 tries to get this right. Can you believe this shit? I can't. It's a waste of time, and I can't afford to waste this much time on a single title. This is my 4th time recording this. Hopefully I don't screw it up like I did all the other 3. It's not really that I screwed it up, I just didn't like them. And hopefully I don't have to record any more game footage. That is just driving me insane. Every time I try it, I just lose the footage, or it's corrupted, or it's just not compatible, or both. I don't know. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what it's gonna take, but I have to shave 30 minutes off of that. So let's take a Watchman's look at CORTEX COMMAND. I'm just gonna get right into it. The game self-describes as an indie action strategy physics 2D sandbox, and I would have to agree with, well, most of those. Strategy certainly is in the game, but to a very limited degree. Other than that, the game's description reads, choose between different factions with their own set of expendable soldiers, mechas, and weapons. Protect your brain, mine gold, and destroy the enemy Cortex in his bunker complex. And that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? And what is the expectation? Well, the screenshots reveal that the game is about some kind of land war, in which you can build bunkers, you can control many units, the game is 2D, with the terrain represented as a cross-section, that it's about some kind of space invasion. You can also clearly see how the screenshots show off the particle effects and explosions which occur, and to its credit, they do look pretty cool. And then something which is becoming increasingly rare in the video game industry, I feel, and that is a 4-player split-screen co-op. Not many of those nowadays, is there? And I mean, hell, I'm already excited about this game, and I haven't even scrolled down to the About section where the game is boasting about an in-game buying menu, fully destructible environments, and a strategic metagame campaign, and built-in editors for the modding I mean, this would make any gamer's mouth water. My expectations are fairly high, just on what I've read and what I've been seeing. So having established our high hopes for the game, it's time to put it on the big stage and see if it lives up to those expectations. And just as the game is starting, I'm seeing something that I don't like, and that is the fact that the game loads all of the assets at launch. And while I'm not 100% against this, it can be quite the performance draw on a low-end system, which prevents the player from multitasking while the game is loading. The positive is that there will be no loading screens. You will be able to jump straight into the action. Obviously, there is a simple solution to this problem. Just install the game on an SSD. Since they have much faster transfer speed, loading times won't even be an issue. Besides the fact that the game is only about 100 megabytes, so it won't take up much space. Until you start modding it, and after that, the loading times just get even longer. But of course, not everyone has access to an SSD, so this is still something that we have to level against the game. Which then does something that I don't quite understand. Once it is done loading, it shows us the brand splash screen, then a little tip on how to enjoy the game better, and then it shows us a cutscene. So let me get this straight, you put the player through the whole process of loading the game, and only then do you show a cutscene. To me, it seems far more sensible to show the cutscene at the beginning, as the game loads, to hide that fact to the players, but perhaps that's a limitation with the engine that I'm just not seeing. Thankfully, you can skip this and go straight into the main menu. Although I would advise that you watch this cutscene on your first playthrough, not just because it's fairly awesome despite it being just a slideshow, but because it is the only story that you're ever going to get. You see, this is not a story-heavy game, so don't come here expecting a gripping storyline because you won't get one. And for sure that can be disappointing, but it's not really game ending. And after all of that, we've managed to make our way to the main menu. It seems like it was ages ago. So we're here. What do we see? Campaign, scenario battle, options and controls, mod manager, and game editors. And then of course, the credits. Just FYI, I didn't really get into this game for modding anything, so I didn't bother with the game editors, although I'm sure they work fine. So, campaign, I feel like that was the wrong name for it. You know, because one would typically connect a campaign with a story of some kind, and as mentioned before, that is very much not the case here. I'm also not entirely sure what the Steam About section was talking about with the whole metagame aspect. A metagame is a developed strategical layer to a game which typically involves more than one strategy being employed to succeed, depending on your opponent's actions. Keyword: developed. It is created by the players and it is commonly associated with multiplayer-centric games, such as StarCraft, Hearthstone, and say even Paladins. The meta shifts depending on the build of the game and what strategies work at the time. Strategies, plural. And CORTEX Command doesn't really have that. and certainly isn't multiplayer. No, the campaign is mostly a minigame, and all it really does is add context to the main subject of the game, the scenario battle. Within scenario battle, you'll be able to choose from several game modes, such as wave defense and many others like siege. This is where I found I spend most of my hours with the game. Next item is the options menu. And there isn't much of one, is there? No, just the basics. Resolution options, full screen mode, individual, accurate sliders for the sound and music, very much appreciated, and some gameplay options which will help improve performance if you're running on a low-end system. I've had issues with the full screen option, by the way, which involve that I found that the game has a problem with any resolution which is 16 by 10. For some reason the engine does not support it. The game will refuse to run and give you this, then promptly crash. An issue I'm not sure how hard it is to fix, but the developers sure are taking a long damn time. The way I got it to run was I went into the config files and I literally played trial and error. I just typed in one resolution, hit start and see if it worked. If it didn't, I repeated until I reached something which would cover most of the screen. And thankfully the game does bind the cursor to the window. If it hadn't, it would have probably been a game-breaking bug. The rest of the options menu is the controls, and even though it says players, they're more like control schemes, since there's nothing restricting you to always be player 1. You can control the game using mouse and keyboard or a controller. The game gives you several controller schemes to choose from, or you can select a custom one. Rebindable keys, a good thing to see, except you can only rebind the keyboard, not the mouse, even though you only use 3 buttons on the mouse, and after that the mouse just takes on the role of a simulated joystick for some reason, even though I think that an aim dot would have been better, but it is still more accurate than a controller, so I will take it. Lastly, on the main menu, the mod manager, where you control which mods and scripts will be active during your game. Note, this won't affect whether or not they get loaded. They'll still be loaded at launch, even if they're disabled. You will simply not have them available during your match. And I feel that it's time to see how this game does in the gameplay department, because we've talked about everything else except for that, so let's jump into the gameplay. Let's go, new campaign. Oh, hold on, it's telling me to do the tutorial? What? Have you any idea how long I have been gaming? I don't need your tutorial, I can figure this out on my own. And that is the wrong attitude to have towards this game. If you're fresh and you expect to handle it, you won't. You'll most likely rage quit. Play the tutorial. Because this game is rather hard to control. Which means that it's hard to get into. And the first time you play, you will most likely end up dead. And don't worry, it's normal. The first 2 times that I tried to get into this game, I myself rage quitted. And the trick is using a controller. I used a controller, and the game became so much easier to control. I found that it was really easy to get into this game with a controller. And once you have experience with a controller, you can switch to the mouse and keyboard for more precision. So you play the tutorial, and it does a pretty good job at explaining the basics and giving the player a running start to figure out the rest of the game. How to move, switch bodies, use a ladder, use the jetpack, which is very fun by the way, and how to use weapons and so on. The gameplay consists of you, the player, being able to control several characters, though you can only control one at a time, to achieve an objective, be it destroy the enemy brain, protect your own, or both. If your forces are running low, you can always call in backup, literally anywhere on the map, even on top of the enemy, so long as you have gold, which can be mined from the ground using a mining tool, which can also be used as a very useful close-range weapon. The game struggles a little bit when it comes to teaching you about the, to quote the Steam page, the in-game buying menu. Which sounds like microtransactions, doesn't it? Now, not to worry, this game is a rare relic from the time before all that whole shit show. Now, the buying menu is where you call in your units. The problem with the game's explanation is that it does the whole show and tell thing, and while it does a very good job of telling you, it does a fairly poor job of showing you. Thankfully, it's fairly intuitive, and you shouldn't really have a problem figuring it all out. The campaign is a turn-based affair where you fight for control over a planet. You do this by sending brains to key locations, mining stations. If there are brains from more than one faction in one single place, you enter a battle stage where you fight to destroy the other brains while defending your own. Once you have defeated the enemy, you can take control of the mining stations and you are free to assign a defense budget, which you can use to build a bunker on that mining station, which takes a turn or several to build. If you can pay for all of the items on one single turn, everything will be built on that turn. How do you pay for this? You control the mining stations. Each one will give you 1,000 gold per turn. Your brains will cost you 200 per turn. If you have no brains left, you won't have to pay this upkeep. If you have no gold left, the game will automatically sell one of your remaining brains and it will give you 4,000 gold. The game ends once all factions have run out of brains, or when no more battles can occur, and the faction with the most mining stations wins the game. So I have a couple of problems with this, the first being that it feels rather simplistic and repetitive. For whatever reason, the AI always builds the same predetermined bunkers every single time. I wish that the game could innovate in some way there, like procedural generation or whatever. Also, it feels like the AI doesn't make any dynamic decisions, because after you've been playing for a while, you start reading the lines in the sand and you can legitimately avoid the clusterfuck of the first turn, because you know that the AI will always attack that site first. Every single time, every time you play through the game. And you can't interact with any of the other factions except with hot, fast-moving pieces of metal or plasma, so they feel shallow and underdeveloped. And sure, you can enhance the experience by playing with friends, but that's no excuse, everything is better with friends. My second gripe is the fact that the campaign is still buggy at times, and it tells you, the game tells you right here. There are still many bugs I've run into. One where once you beat back an enemy, that same enemy will have 2,000 gold out of nowhere, which is basically infinite money. Or where you will attack an enemy base and emerge from that attack with negative 20,000 gold, which is game-ending amount, by the way. That particular one may have something to do with the game not giving you an option to select how many units you go into an attack with, and it consequently gives you too many units and you can't pay for them, so it just charges you too much money. And then obviously I should mention that the game does still crash sometimes, so just be aware that this game still has bugs in it despite it being in development for 16 fucking years. Unrelated to that, you may have been taking in what's been going on in the background, and doubtless you've been listening too. And I have to give it that, this game does have a pretty good soundtrack and sound design. Here, have a listen to the soundtrack. Pretty neat, right? Some of the tracks are better than the others, but I especially like the one on the intro cinematic. That soundtrack, I wish that was in the game, and it's a shame that it isn't. And here are some of the sound effects. They're really good. They really feel like they have an impact, visually and audibly. Overall, really good sound design. And honestly, as much shit as I can give this game, even though it earned it, I am still here having tons of fun with this game. I mean, it feels amazing to shoot a rocket and have a spacecraft come crashing down from the sky and leave a wreck on the floor that your soldiers can then trample and dissolve in gunfire, and everybody fallen is a body that litters the battlefield. It's a lot of fun. It's a very satisfying display of physics simulation. And so seems to indicate the Steam page. A rather fair score of very positive. It is safe to say that this game's player base feels pretty good about this game, and that respect is legitimate in my honest opinion. I have to mention something which is missing, something I feel retracts from the experience more than anything else, and that is the lack of multiplayer of any description. I wouldn't usually give a game shit for missing the multiplayer mode, but in this case I feel it actively hurts the game because artificial intelligence just can't carry the game for long enough. I mean, this game is about building castles and then use those castles to blow up the rest of the castles. But I want to blow up other people's castles, not just my own. Without that, the only thing that's left to carry this game long term is the modding scene, and I'm happy to report that it does so rather well. The modding scene is extensive and talented. However, we have to judge a game by its own values and merits, not on the merits of other people. So I'm afraid that the modding scene is not enough to excuse this game. Nonetheless, I'd say the game fulfills expectations rather well. It carries its promise of particle physics chaos really well. Sound design is very satisfying, the tutorial is useful, and the feeling that it gives you about brutal warfare and a genuine impact on the battlefield is second to only very few titles. Despite this, the game still has many bugs and problems, not least of which is not being able to support 16:10 resolutions. I mean, it is 16 years of development. How has this not been solved yet? The controls may have many new players turned off due to their difficulty, plus the repetitive and simplistic nature of the campaign combined with the uninventive AI and lack of multiplayer leave this title to suffer a short life. And yet, it is still really fun. So what can I say? I do recommend you give this game a run for its money. It may provide you with a lot of cathartic memories of death, damnation, destruction and domination. Pick up this game on a sale if you must, and if you're not convinced by the 2-hour mark, you can always refund it. And that was CORTEX COMMAND. I do recommend that you give this game a run for its money. It's available on Steam for £15, €19 or $20. So yeah, it's the price of an indie game, it's rather cheap. Anyway, that's my time. Thanks for watching. Feel free to check out the rest of my stuff. This is Charlie Watchtower, and this show is over. Game is a developed strategical layer that... Is somebody out there? No, that was just my phone. Never mind. Shows us the brand splash screen, then a little... Fucking hell, who the fuck texted... Seriously guys, I don't know who texted me, but fuck you. Who was it? Oh, it's my mom. Shit. just a sec.